Hello there, very good evening to you. You are watching Vantage Point. We are coming to your living room after about a week, but a lot has happened during this week. And we've come to realize that major incidents have happened in the Yahapalani government. And these resignations that have been taking place will quite determine whether or not the Yahapalani government is in the right course or not. Well, to discuss it further, we've got Dr. Vantage with us here in the studio. Thank you very much for joining us, Doctor.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to talking about what's going on.
Well, Doctor, like I said earlier in the beginning of the program, we've seen officials asked to resign. Some of them even did it themselves, but some of them were asked to resign. The Yahapalani government is quite on the course of really establishing democracy, or at least that's what it seems like. But what is really happening inside? Is the Yahapalani government in chaos? Is that the reason why you see politicians step down to cover up a bigger mess?
Well, as far as democracy goes, I'll believe it when the first election is actually held, because elections are long overdue and there are repeated attempts to postpone them. So I'll suspend my judgment on the democratic nature of the Yahapalani government until we have an election. Now, this is clearly the most dysfunctional government I've seen in Sri Lanka in my lifetime. It's deadlocked. There's a kind of a soft anarchy in the government. It's chaotic. It's controlled chaos. I think that the Vijayadasa Rajapaksa crisis, which comes on the heels of the Ravi Karunanayake crisis and exit, will determine the destiny of the Yahapalani administration. But it will do so in a way rather different from that which most politicians and commentators think. Right. It's an absolutely decisive crossroads that the government has arrived at, and what happens from now on, in fact, right, today, tomorrow, this week certainly, will be seen by political historians years, maybe decades down the road, as the defining point in the destiny of this administration, so, possibly even the country.
So are you saying that this shows weakness of the government really destabilizing, or at least the government trying to get back up and bounce back?
Well, it shows division in the government. It shows confusion and chaos. Right. It doesn't necessarily show weakness, but this problem was inherent in the government. To me, this is not about Vijayadasa Rajapaksa failing to catch crooks.
Right.
This is about the Presidential Commission on the Bond Scam being about to catch the biggest crook, right, because this was the biggest robbery that had taken place. Never anywhere in the world do you have the central bank of a country ripped off. Right. Now, when did all of this stuff about Vijayadasa start? It started when Ravi had to go. Then you had the government, or UNP members of the government, right, shouting about the way in which Ravi had been questioned by the officials of the Attorney General's Department during the proceedings of the Commission. That's how it started. So the real target is not Vijayadasa Rajapaksa. The real target is the Attorney General's Department and the Presidential Commission. Now, they can't do anything about the presiding judge, who is a man of great integrity. They can't do it because this is not the 1970s. In the 1970s, when we had a UNP administration, judges who gave, Supreme Court judges who gave a ruling that the government was unhappy about, found that their houses were stoned by thugs, led openly by a thug called Kalulaki. And the stoning of the judges' houses was defended in Parliament by Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, who is now our Prime Minister. Now, times have changed. This is the 21st century. You can't do that anymore. So if you can't do that to Justice Jayawardena, who is the head of the Presidential Commission, you have to cripple the officials, Daput Livera and Yasanta Kodaguda, who are functioning as the 19th Amendment said that they would function, independent. You know, how do you do that? You have to get the Aegis department under control.
Yeah, but Vijayadasa Rajapaksa has already lost integrity, or at least the image. The media has, the news that's coming out, the information that's coming out really points out to the fact that he is at fault at one point or the other. For covering it up, for not really...
Covering what up? Because the bond scam, nobody's covering it up. It's proceeding full steam ahead.
What is the reason behind the backlog? If the Attorney General's Department is saying that it's not been given the green light, what is really stopping them from having these cases being...
Stephanie, now, if instead of discussing Vijayadasa Rajapaksa's issue on our show today, we talked about something of less importance, there would be something really wrong with our show. Similarly, if you want to catch crooks, you start with the biggest and most recent robbery. The bond scam is so big that the Auditor General says he can't even quantify the ongoing loss to the nation. And there's been nothing this big. So it's the biggest robbery. Secondly, it's the most recent. Now, when you investigate something, it's obviously easier to investigate something that's fresh because people remember, the people are around. You can haul them in. They're not retired. You can ask them who gave the orders. So you start with the biggest robbery and the most recent robbery. And that has been happening with Vijayadasa as Justice Minister. I'm not saying that he should be given a garland for that, but what it means is that he has not obstructed the Attorney General's Department has not obstructed the investigation into the biggest and most recent robbery, and that is the central bank bond scam.
So he was a subject minister during that time as well?
He was a subject minister. So he hasn't stopped it. The first questions that were raised were by Rajitha Senaratne saying, how dare the Aegis department officials, who are government officials, grill a sitting government minister in the way they grill Ravi? Now, what kind of question is that? The Aegis department is supposed to be independent. Now, they are worried as to where this investigation will go. It will go the way they see it, because the term was extended by 3 months by President Sirisena. Yeah. That's the worry. They thought that it wouldn't be extended. Now it's extended. There are 3 months to go. The clock is ticking. From Ravi, it will go to Arjuna Aloysius. From Arjuna Aloysius, it will go to Arjuna Mahendran. From Arjuna Mahendran, it will go to whoever gave Arjuna Mahendran the green light to do what he did, and who brought him in, and whose name has been mentioned in Arjuna Aloysius' SMSs, and whose name was mentioned in D.U. Gunasekara's first COPE report. Now, the UNP needs to stop that. How can they stop it? They can't dissolve the Presidential Commission. They can't stone Justice Jayawardena's house.
Right.
They have got to gag the Aegis department officials who are doing the cross-examination. And to do that, they have to get rid of Vijayadasa Rajapaksa, who is protecting them.
Well, if the government has been having discussions with Vijayadasa Rajapaksa for a long time, they've been having backdoor conversations, but then there has not yet been any decision on his resignation, even though government officials keep saying that he needs to resign. Even his party keeps saying. They have turned their backs on him. But what is taking so long for the government to take a decision or even sack him from his position?
Because there is no single government. This is not a UNP government, it's a UNP-driven government. But the president is SLFP. There's an SLFP component in the government. Vijayadasa is not an SLFP. Vijayadasa is UNP. And why is Vijayadasa saying what he's saying? Firstly, that's his habit. When Mahinda Rajapaksa was in office, Vijayadasa Rajapaksa, when all these guys were silent, went up against the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration as the chair of COPE.
Right.
And he initiated proceedings to get back state property that had been privatized by Chandrika. And he also stood up against Mahinda Rajapaksa on certain matters of malpractice and corruption. And then he quit. So this is what the guy does. If he thinks something is wrong, he stands up and he resigns. Now, why is he not resigning now? Because he doesn't think he's done anything wrong. The second thing is he is reflecting something that's going on in the UNP. What he's doing is he's reflecting the sentiments or the sense of alienation of the Sinhala Buddhist voters at the grassroots of the UNP.
Right.
Not the ones who are with the SLFP, but the ones who are with the UNP.
But do you think it's a safe option for Vijaydas Rajapaksa to really step down on his own, or to be impeached?
He should be sacked. I mean, I'm not saying that he should be sacked because he's done something wrong, but he shouldn't fall on his sword, because unlike Ravi Karunanayake, there is no proof that he has done anything wrong.
What if the parliament comes together with a no confidence motion against him? Do you think the party itself will lose credibility?
Well, the no confidence motion won't hold because President Sirisena's faction of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party has openly said that it will not support a no confidence motion against Vijaydas Rajapaksa. So if they bring a no confidence motion against him, two things happen. One, the UNP and the SLFP in government will be at loggerheads. The SLFP and the joint opposition will vote against the no confidence motion. So it will bring a section of the SLFP and another section that's outside the government together. We don't know what the JVP will do. The JVP seems to be saying that Vijaydas Rajapaksa is being made a scapegoat. That is what Anura Kumara Dissanayake said yesterday. He said, look, this guy may have blocked inquiries, but believe you me, he's not the only guy who has done so. Now, there is a strange coincidence, Stephanie, between the so-called footnote group, whose names are there in the footnotes, and the ones who started shouting about Vijaydas. Just look at the names. If you look at the people who signed the footnotes in the Handunethi Corp report, the so-called footnote clique, isn't it a strange coincidence that these are the same people who are tweeting about Vijayadasa and shouting about Vijayadasa? Is it that they don't want Vijayadasa there because they want a Minister of Justice who will instruct the AG's department not to push hard, and therefore the next round of revelations from Arjun Aloysius about who gave what to whom, or from another Anika Vijayasuriya, will just not be heard.
But when we look at the incidents that have been happening over the week, we see, Doctor, that Vijaydas Rajapaksa has lost credibility among the party members themselves.
Not party members, parliamentarians and working committee. The party members
there are
those are the
considerable
grassroots.
amount of people who have turned their backs on him.
Outside of parliament?
In parliament, in the party itself.
Those are not party members. Those are not just party members. Those are people. Those are MPs. Now, the same thing happened to Premadasa. There was an impeachment against him. I was there. I remember.
So can he continue being in his position with all of these, taking all of these into consideration?
Well, you know, if it were a UNP government, obviously not. But it's not a UNP government. The president who decides now, the way the president moves on this will tell us a lot about the president. If the president says, hey, I don't see anything wrong with this guy, I'm not going to sack him, then it shows that the president is trying to balance between the UNP and SLFP wings of his government. Well, there are two wings of the government.
Well, Doctor, we are looking at some of the very important dimensions of this story and reports that we've been receiving, but we need to head into a short commercial break. Only on Vantage Point you'll see the dimensions and the analysis in depth. Come back after this short commercial break. We'll extensively discuss about this topic. Welcome back. You're watching Vantage Point, and today on this program we are extensively discussing whether or not Vijaydas Rajapaksa will step down from his position, and if he steps down, what is really ahead of him. Well, Doctor, you were talking about whether or not Vijaydas Rajapaksa remaining in the party would be a stumbling block for him to continue as an MP, even if he resigns from his post as Minister of Justice.
What's the history of the UNP and Parliament? Now, the argument that what he's saying goes completely against what the what the other MPs are saying and that he's bound by collective cabinet responsibility doesn't really hold water. When the whole of the UNP, mind you, it had a 5-6 majority at the time,
Right.
decided to remove Mrs. Bananayaka's civic rights. And the motion was moved by the Prime Minister at that time, R. Premadasa. No less than Gamini Dissanayake dissented. I mean, they talk about Gamini Jasuri resigning over the 13th Amendment. But Gamini Dissanayake got up and spoke against the removal of Mrs. Bananayaka's civic rights in 1980. Did anybody sack him? Did they say, hey, you are on one side and all of us are on the other, you can't stay here? No, because that was the UNP of that day. It was a very disciplined party, but it was a disciplined democratic party. I mean, it did a lot of undemocratic things as a government, but within the party there was democracy. Today there isn't. I'll give you another example, far more important. In 1987, when the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord was signed and the IPKF, the Indian Peacekeeping Force, landed, the Prime Minister was totally opposed to it. So was Minister of National Security Lalita Mudalik. They boycotted Rajiv Gandhi, the signing ceremony. They boycotted the reception. Mr. Premadasa, I mean, the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation, which is the government's broadcasting arm, the employees who were sympathetic to Prime Minister Premadasa hit the streets with placards against the Indo-Lanka Accord and the IPKF. The chairman at that time was a rather notorious chap who became more notorious when he supported Mahinda Rajapaksa, a foul-mouthed man called Hudson Samarasinha. He was the chairman under the Jayawardena government. He led a demonstration against an accord that Jayawardena had just signed. Was Premadasa sacked?
Were they sacked from the television station?
I don't think so. This is the SLBC. I don't think so. Premadasa? No. I mean, his dissent was open. And in fact, if they had sacked Premadasa, he wouldn't have been there to be UNP candidate in 88. You may ask Sirisena Kure, who's alive and kicking. Mr. Premadasa said, if they don't give me the candidacy, we are going to contest the presidency as a third force, independently. And that would have sunk the UNP. He was ready. But they were smart enough to keep him as Prime Minister, despite his open dissent. And then he was the candidate in 1988. And he won. He beat Mrs. Bananayaka. And the UNP survived. So, what you have is a UNP which was a democratic party within it. But it's not so now. There have been these celebrated dissenters who are far more outspoken on far more important issues than Vijayadasa Rajapaksa is now. It's just that the level of tolerance of the UNP has changed, it has lowered, and that is because, as Mr. Sirisena Kure, the General Secretary of the party, said in your station, on a newsline, he said the reason is that the working committee, according to the old UNP constitution, the working committee at that time was drawn from the UNP's grassroots organizations, because he was one of those who drafted the party constitution. But under Mr. Wickramasinghe, the working committee is nominated by him. So what you have now is a rubber stamp. It's not the UNP of Jayawardena, let alone the UNP of Saranayaka. And that is why there's such a lynch mob against Vijayadasa Rajapaksa. If they were smart, they'd keep him as a default option. When they want their Sinhala Buddhist votes back, they can switch to him. But if they go the route they're going, the Vijayadasa Rajapaksa incident, or the crisis, will become the equivalent of the Karuna rebellion in the LTT. Why did the LTT lose? Because the military fought better. But the crucial turning point was the Karuna breakaway in 2004. Now, there were those in Batikalo, citizens groups, who were trying to patch up Karuna and the LTT leadership, but it failed. Now, I'm happy it failed, but it was because of the arrogance of the LTT leadership of Prabhakaran, Pottuamman and so on, that it could not be reconciled, and the Karuna splinter broke away. And that was the beginning of the end of the Tigers, 2004. The way they are handling Vijayadasa Rajapaksa is going to be seen someday. If they handle it wrong, if they handle it the way they are doing now, instead of being smart and keeping the guy on board, if they drive him out, that would be the equivalent of the Karuna breakaway, and they will suffer the same consequences electorally. They will lose their Sinhala Buddhist vote.
Well, we've got about a week to really see whether or not...
this week I think it will get
this
resolved.
week the discussions are taking place, so we will see whether or not that will work out for the best. Well, the inland tax revenue bill is being slated to be brought to Parliament this Friday by the new Finance Minister, Mangala Samaraweera. He made an announcement to the media. Well, we'll discuss about that after this short commercial break. Welcome back. You're watching Vantage Point, and we are about to discuss about whether or not the Inland Revenue Bill, which is to be tabled this Friday, is going to be a decisive one for the government itself, and particularly for the Minister of Finance, the new Minister of Finance, Mangala Samaraweera. This could really define whether or not he is eligible for this position of Minister of Finance. Well, he was quiet for a while when the bill was being mulled. We didn't have any information until today, until Tuesday of this week. But it's interesting to know that this is actually the third bill that will be mulled by a government after the year 2000. And he has even promised that direct taxes will be increased and indirect taxes will be reduced, really taking the burden off the people for a while. Do you think that this is really going to be a defining moment for the government itself, if this really works out for the best?
Well, yes, it's going to be one more defining moment. What's happening now, it's a series of defining moments, as it were, Ravi, Vijayadasa, Inland Revenue and so on. Why? Because of something that nobody's really talking about, or they're talking about it elsewhere. And that is whether the SLFP will stay or go. Because as we speak, we have come up with we've come to really the second anniversary of the signing of the MOU between the UNP and the SLFP. And that's the backdrop for this whole discussion, really. Everything has to be understood in the context of the changing relationship between the UNP and the SLFP. How will the SLFP view this Inland Revenue Bill? Now, Minister Samaraweera said what you just recapitulated, that this will be a shift from indirect to direct taxation, meaning less pressure on prices, more
on companies
and so on. Now, when you unpack it, there are a couple of questions. I hope he answers them in Parliament. It would seem that the tax slab, the tax burden on the individual has been enhanced. Now, that usually doesn't happen under market-friendly administration. For instance, if you earn 600,000 rupees a year, which is 50,000 rupees a month, which isn't a huge amount of money, meaning middle class, maybe even lower middle class, then you have to pay more taxes, not less. But if you are a company, then you have to pay less.
Right.
So, direct taxes certainly, but a preference for capital over citizen. The second thing is that even the employer's contribution to the employee's provident fund will be taxed from the employee. Now, if under our social welfare system and under anybody's social welfare system, your employer puts in some money into the EPF. you are the beneficiary, because at the end of the day, all of this adds up and that's your little nest egg.
Right.
But what this legislation is purported to do, according to critics, is that you are going to be seen as the beneficiary of that money that they're bound to pay anyway, the employer, and you're going to be taxed as getting a higher income. So,
Right.
this, as I said, seems to be a citizen-unfriendly tax structure, but which is corporate-friendly.
Right.
And I don't see how that's going to help. And let's see what the Sri Lanka Freedom Party does. It's really a turning point for the SLFP, all of these things, because they have to decide which way they're going to jump. Are they going to stay on and renew the Memorandum of Understanding with the UNP without any significant changes in the composition or the course that the government is taking?
Right.
In other words, are they
Right.
just going to extend?
Right.
Or are they going to assert themselves in some way?
Right.
Or are they going to bail out? That is really the backdrop in which all of this, including the Inland Revenue Bill, has to be looked at.
Well, we've down to like 2 minutes of the program now. Let's talk about world affairs. There's never a dull moment until US President Trump is in the White House,
Yeah.
where we see him talking about Afghanistan and how the troops will remain in Afghanistan, even though he campaigned against it before the presidential election itself. We see him really asking the troops to remain in Afghanistan. But my question is, do you think if he removes the troops from Afghanistan, it will really destabilize Asia itself? Because for now, what kept Asia secure was the US troops being there, even though that was demonstrated to be what demonstrated US to secure Asia itself, to cut down all the breeding grounds for Taliban. But do you think that they're really keeping up with this promise? For 16 years they remained in Afghanistan, but have they really pushed Taliban away?
Well, they say that it's to keep Asia secure, and Asia has been secure not because of the United States being in Afghanistan, but Asia has been secure because Asia is richer. Asia has several strong powers in it, and Asia isn't stupid. Asians don't get involved in wars in other continents, unlike the West. Asia doesn't have a colonial history. So Asia is doing well, and therefore it's more secure. As far as the Americans go, this is the longest war the United States has ever been involved in. And it's not working. President Obama started the withdrawal from Afghanistan because they weren't winning. And President Trump also said that we should not be in Afghanistan. But now, when they haven't succeeded, he's extending their presence. So I don't see what the Americans can do in Afghanistan that they haven't tried for 16 years. What's the new thing that they can do? Especially when there's turmoil in American cities. I mean, I'm talking Charlottesville, Virginia. So, in an increasingly polarized America, how can America play a role for stability in any other part of the world when its own society?
Question to ask right at the end of the program. It will get all of our viewers thinking. Remember, you can send us your views, your questions to newsfirst@maharaja.lk. This place is always open for all the questions, and we'll definitely feature them on the program. This is Vantage Point. I'm Stephanie Lazarus. We'll see you next fortnight. Good night.